can tell just from the chat box, we have folks joining from everywhere. And so there's a little bit of living vicariously through all of you because I haven't left my home for about 3 months. So it's really, really nice to see other parts of the world and friendly faces from other parts of the world. So just a little bit about our plan for today and what we have in store. We hope this is a bit of respite for you. We wanted you to be able to take a break in your very, very busy day. So many of you are either leading firms, leading companies, leading sort of human resources, people practices. We know this has been an incredibly busy few months for you. So we wanted to bring you together, give you a chance to learn, connect, get best practice ideas from one another. So we will have a chance for you to dialogue. We also just wanted to give pause to really where we are in this moment in time. As really the word pandemic was introduced to us a few months ago and is now a day-to-day part of our language, we thought it was a good point in time to provide some outreach and to be able to step back. We're going to talk about your organizational cultures. I think it's probably been top of mind for so many of you as we've been hearing from many of our clients. And so we want to take a look at, where do you focus at this point in time? There's so many elements of culture that are flowing into the day-to-day decisions that you're making as leaders, the guidance you're giving your organizations and your stakeholders. And so we thought this would be really good to provide some framing to what to think about, how to prioritize. Before we close, it's sort of towards the end of our discussion, we want to share with you what we hope will be practical takeaways in terms of 4 core principles that we think can help you in your next steps planning. And many of you may already be amidst or have completed your next phase planning. I think for a while we were all saying post-COVID-19. I think we've kind of stepped back from that phrase and that language, and we're thinking much more now about how do we enter the next phase and the next phase, and how do we get a long enough view of the impact of this crisis and what we're taking from it, as well as the potential for our organization's cultures to really drive us forward and thrive. So that's what we have in store. As I said, there'll be a little bit of a respite in this, in that we'll give you a little time to reflect, some time to dialogue, some time to apply, and we'll provide sort of the takeaway. I think a few of you have asked already on the chat, will we be able to provide a copy of the recording, a copy of the actual webinar? The answer is yes. We're very happy to send that your way. Also happy to conduct something similar in your organization if it's helpful for you as you're thinking this through. So I think we'll just pause a second and kind of take stock of just who's on the call today and where you're joining us from. It's really fantastic to see the far reach, and it will be interesting to hear from all of you because we're living in a world where a local and a regional perspective is making a difference. We're all in this together as one global sort of workforce. At the same time, there are nuances, whether you're in Buenos Aires or Sao Paulo or Dublin or El Paso, Texas, where I'm sitting in right now. There are nuances to be taken into consideration for your workforces and for your employees.
One comment as we begin the session here, just around the context. So as you decided to join this session today, and we appreciate you doing so, this idea of emerge stronger, as Rose and I and our colleagues are out working with clients right now on culture, it's a theme that's come up over and over and over again. And it goes something like this. There was this pre-pandemic experience that we had in our organization, and maybe there were things where we weren't going fast enough or we weren't innovative enough or those sorts of things. And all of a sudden, things that seemed impossible in the past were quickly being done. There are still some things we want to adjust in the culture, but how do we keep those things that really were introduced in this pandemic? How do we continue to shape that and emerge stronger out of this crisis than when we entered? So just a little context on where that came from and a bit of the framing for the conversation today.
Thanks, Chad. I think it's a really important framing. Terrific. So we wanted to use that polling feature again. And, I think you all have probably been very active in taking the pulse of your employees and your organization, but has anyone taken your pulse lately? So we thought we'd just take a minute to say, in a word, how are you feeling today? So if you would use the technology you just used to indicate where you were from, using the Poll Everywhere app, and just give us a sense of, in a word, how you're feeling.
What a positive, optimistic group.
It is. And even those who are feeling exhausted and challenged, I have to say it's an empathetic moment, probably for many of you. I know it is for me, to say there's been some combination of all these feelings that have been present, over the course of leading through this pandemic, for sure. Great. Well, we hope that those big words of optimistic, hopeful, rise to the fore, and when we hang up on this call, that you're able to have that energy taken with you. Chad, next slide. Yeah, so I do want to introduce you just quickly to our team. First of all, Chad Carr is one of our partners. Chad leads a lot of our work in the industrial area and the consumer area. Chad, a few words, our co-facilitator today.
Absolutely great to meet you. Yeah, I'm in North America. I live in Ohio and operate out of here. As Rose mentioned, I do spend a lot of time in the industrial area, financial services and consumer. And I came to Heidrick Consulting about 5 years ago as a client about 15 years ago. And the 4 principles that Rose will walk you through here at the end of the session were just remarkable transformation for me and my company. And so just took the opportunity 5 years ago to make this my day job, my regular job, and excited to be with you today.
Thanks, Chad. And as I said, I hail from El Paso, Texas, here on the border with Ciudad Juarez and that southwest tip of the state. We have a number of our teammates joining us today who you'll get a chance to meet in breakout rooms. Thanks to all of you for joining. So to start, just kind of with an overview, what we're hearing from so many of our clients is that amidst this, interesting and probably haven't said the word unprecedented as many times as I have in the last few months. So, folks are really facing a number of challenges. I mean, to start with, certainly, IT pressures, HR pressures, technological capabilities. We had to pivot overnight, all of us did, to finding new ways to engage and to communicate. So that whole remote collaboration that many of us are looking at as a way of life and new ways of working that come with it. I think, many of you are in the midst of shifting operating models right now, whether it's through the social lockdown or even as you're emerging to the next phase, you're seeing that. And then a variety of digital technologies, not just those IT-related collaboration vehicles, but big picture, how do you reach your customers? How do you reach your stakeholders? And then finding innovative ways to bring your value proposition to life in the new world, affecting obviously so many of the consumer-facing businesses in a significant way. Would love to hear just in the chat feature if there are other challenges that you're wrestling with right now, or if any of these in particular are resonating for you, because I know we we've been hearing these over and over again as being, just significant elements of what people are dealing with and what they're planning around in this time. So with that backdrop, I think one thing we know for sure is there is talent attraction. Laura Sue, thank you, and welcome, Laura Sue. Is another significant one. Both talent attraction, talent retention, talent strategy in a changing world. So just as we're looking at this and thinking about the changes in the market, Sarah, thank you. New customer challenges, the idea of mentorship, communication in this new world. Really great ads from our participants right now. I think the one thing that sort of hits me is this notion of overwhelm, the risk of having to juggle so many of these things at once. And I'm guessing just from your introductions in the chat and the role that you all play, that you may be finding that sense of overwhelm to creep up from time to time in order to solve for some of these challenges and really develop plans that enable you to pivot quickly to those new ways of working. One of the things that we find to be really important in our work with clients around the topic of organizational culture is to really use mindfulness as a way to step back, to gain clarity, to reflect. And so we actually thought we'd give you a mindfulness moment, the respite that I described in the introduction, just a chance to sit back for a minute. So if you're on video, feel free to click off the video for a minute. Just get comfortable and maybe take a pen out and a piece of paper and spend some time reflecting. And I'll sort of voice over for you a number of questions. While you're just pausing for a minute, if you would just start to pay attention and notice your breathing. In fact, just taking a moment to breathe literally is something that we think is important in order to gain that clarity. So just take a second, get your pen and paper, focus on your breathing. And I'll start with a few reflection questions to help you step back. So think for just a minute about when you first heard about the pandemic, COVID-19, the health crisis. What was your first thought when you heard about it? What were your impressions? Did you assume that maybe it was going to be an issue for other countries, other industries, and not yourself? When did it really start to seep in that this was going to be a concern for you? Was it something in the news? Was it someone in your company? Was it an employee? Was it a customer? And then think about how the organization that you work with, or your clients, or your customers, began to respond to the immediate changes. How did your leaders deal with it? Were they quick to respond? Were they slow to act? Were they in sort of wait and see mode? What changed in the communications? What did you focus on? What did you communicate regularly? Did you communicate frequently? Did you find increased authenticity in how your leaders were communicating? What new channels were introduced? What did you notice about employee engagement during this time? Bring to mind your organization's purpose and values. What role did those purpose and values play in guiding you through these last few months? Had you focused on culture before the crisis? Did you find yourselves focusing more on your culture through the crisis? Did you notice there were opportunities to strengthen your culture and address challenges? Consider the financial impact of the pandemic, maybe an impact you're dealing with even now. Noticing the financial markets, the reality. What started to happen in your own mindset, in how you played your role? What was happening for employees? What was happening for leaders? Did you begin looking for solutions, or did things slow down or come to a halt for a period of time? How are your customers doing? How has your relationship with them changed? Have you found a different focus for your customers through the change? Are you reconnecting with them now? Think about your employees for a minute. What needs came to the fore through the crisis on their part? How did their expectations change and shift? When did you really have the awareness that you were operating in a new normal? And that this wasn't about when we go back to, but it was really about as we continue and move forward and are future focused. And then most recently, moving in the United States from the pandemic to the recent social unrest and injustice, how have you experienced similar challenges within your organization in terms of purpose and values? How is that shaping your go forward plan? Let you bring that to a close and put your pen down. And with that reflection in place, Chad's going to walk us through just some ways to begin to put some structure around the challenges in terms of your culture and the opportunities to emerge stronger. Chad?
Thanks, Rose. Just a comment on the quote from the slide that you see there around silence isn't empty, it's full of answers. You know, one of the things that we notice with ourselves and with our clients is that we can get very busy-minded during a crisis. Things are going on, you need to make decisions quickly, people are coming to you, new things are arising every day, and yet the answers are just a couple moments away, as Rose was able to help you. Just slow down a minute, just reflect a little bit and start to bring those things to the surface. So thank you for doing that. And what we're going to do in just a moment is we're going to take some of your notes, your thoughts that you have going here, and we're going to share them with others in a small group. So just small discussions. As we do that and move to breakouts in a moment, I would encourage you to go on video if you have that and you're comfortable with it. It'll allow you to connect with others as you see from all over the world, you know, to kind of learn and experience and share some of this. And we did send out a little bit of a pre-read yesterday. If you had the opportunity to take a look at it, great. If not, we'll have a version of that shown in your breakout room. And it has to do with these insights we've gotten over the years around what are the essential dimensions of culture. So what does it take to be a sustainable, healthy, high-performing organization? And there are elements of these all around us. Some of these have probably risen to the top as being very important to you in this time of crisis and the pandemic and all these things that are going on. Others may be more latent and things you want to focus on. So we've got just a brief set of discussion questions to guide that. We're going to give you 15 minutes to connect with some colleagues around the globe, form new relationships, get to know each other, and share some best practices. Then we'll come back, debrief that, and then share these sort of transformational values with you. So with that, let me have Chloe tee up the breakout rooms, and we'll get you off into those. So Chloe, if I can turn it over to you to give us the instructions on how we can go to breakout rooms and have those conversations.
I've assigned each of you to a breakout room with a Heidrick facilitator. If you are connected by phone and have any issues, just reach out to them and they'll connect with me and we'll help you figure it out. But I'll open them in just a moment.
All right, I think we have everyone back from the breakouts. Thank you. Thank you for taking a moment to go and share some best practices and ideas, things you've been finding throughout this experience. We're going to take a moment and sort of capture some of that thinking, if you would. So when you think about your conversation you just had in the breakouts, if you could share those in the chat window, we'd love to have the rest of the rooms be able to benefit from the conversations that you had in your room. So if you think about, one or two things that really struck you in the conversation you just had around, things that were important in the crisis, things you've learned, take a moment and share those in the chat window. We'll have those come in, and then we'll just share those 4 principles in just a moment. So let's do that. Just open up the chat window and begin to share some of those insights, some of the key takeaways you had from your conversations in the breakouts. Collaboration, trust, and transparency. Yeah, the trust word comes up a lot with our clients. Safety, psychological safety, with all the things that are going on. Direction and purpose being a key focus. Thank you. People first. When we think about engaging employees and having people now, being daycare providers as well as caring for others and being in households where there's not really a dedicated space for work, there's all sorts of those things coming up. So thank you for that. Communication, the customer focus, agility and innovation. I think with agility and innovation, what we're seeing with a lot of clients is it was on the list of things to do, somewhat ironically, just weren't really able to pull it forward, and all of a sudden, the light's on, and they're really seeing the value of that. And how do we keep that in our organization? So thank you. We'll have those continue to come in. And I wanted to take just a minute and think about, if we were to look at these dimensions of culture, which ones of these have been most critical? So again, back to the pre-work, if you did have a minute to kind of look at that and circle a few items, what are those top 2 or 3 things that were most important to your organization as you work through this crisis? And what we're going to do is bring up a survey for you, same technology as before, poll.ev/, and you've got your URL there. Just go there in your browser or on your other device, and if you would, just vote. What's the top 2 or 3? You can select multiple. So what are the top 2 or 3 things that you think have been most important for you? We'll watch the data come in here together. So I'm seeing some more come in. Sustainable remote working models, really rethinking the geographic footprint. You see Facebook and others thinking about, how do I pay differently, different geos, allow people to migrate and move, and lots to do there with the remote workforce. Very, very good. Direction and purpose, coming out, very important. When you think about really engaging, a group of employees as they become more distributed, taking on many roles in their home lives, a very important one. That's great. Collaboration and trust being important. Oftentimes when you can't see someone's face, read their impressions and get that sort of feeling, you start to wonder, are we aligned? Are we collaborating? Are they out for my best interest? Very, very good. This is great. So thank you for that. So with that, thank you for voting. Thanks for being in the breakouts. Rose is going to walk you through some of the insights we've had from doing this for 30, 40 years. What are the things that really stand out to make these transformations effective, have a big impact, and to be sustainable? So Rose, we'll close the voting here. Thank you for doing that, and we'll go back to you.
Great, thanks. So, I know many of you have already prepared plans or in the midst of planning, and we'd like to get somewhat practical and provide you with at least a framework to take away that may be useful in your planning processes. So these also happen to be 4 key principles of organizational culture that we think put in place, brought to life in your organizations, will ensure that you do emerge stronger. The first principle is purposeful leadership. So the fact that number 1, sort of driver in your mind was direction and purpose is really affirming of that. As you start to think about purposeful leadership from a planning perspective, from a what's next perspective, the questions really around where's your leadership in your organization today? Are they aligned? Can purpose kind of serve as that sort of realignment driver for them? Is the organization really clear about the direction, and is there a sense of purpose? I think also with purposeful leadership is sort of the intentional steps that you'll take with leaders at all levels of the organization to ensure that you pull through some of the learnings and some of the insights from the crisis and pull those forward with values and purpose at the core. And then I think one more thing we're seeing in the planning process around purposeful leadership is really sort of that intentional commitment that you're going to inspire and that you're going to create across the organization. This will be that talent attractor. This will be that talent retention vehicle. And so, making sure that that's intentional. Some organizations are facing really restructuring, reorganization, realignment. Purposeful leadership matters. How will managers deal with, difficult decisions relative to employees, and how will the values be the guide? So as I'm thinking about sort of your swim lanes underneath purposeful leadership, some of those topics fit right in there. The second principle is around personal change. And the fact of the matter is, so many of you listed agility as sort of an emerging trait and an emerging strength in your organizations, or an emerging need. So I think starting to kind of reshape and revisit your competency model for leaders, for people leaders, and for employees overall. What role does agility play? What else do you pull through? And then really just taking the agility that's come from adjusting to a remote workforce and really starting to hardwire some of that change into your talent practices, into your talent strategy. I think for both purposeful leadership and personal change, the question of how will we operate as a remote workforce going forward is really key in terms of what are the specific actions that you can take, what are some of the areas of focus that are going to be important to you. And then I think the role modeling of your leaders around personal change. We've seen a lot of CEOs speaking from the heart, into the camera, talking about, what's going on for them. We've become much more human as we look into one another's lives through the video camera, and we see kind of the whole lives of our employees. Some of that change is really around the topic of inclusion and belonging, and creating some common ground around the organization. So a lot of what may have been previously termed diversity and inclusion is now really about inclusive culture, and really getting sort of ahead of that. At the same time, we are also in the midst of a crisis in the US, a very serious crisis with BLM, and really thinking about what is the stance we'll take, what is the growth opportunity, how do we move more of our employees into a place of awareness and move from bystander into ally behaviors. So, all of those can fit swim lanes underneath personal change to be very practical in terms of organizational change. The third is broad engagement. And, this is really, you may already have a well-engaged workforce around your personal, around the sense of purpose and the sense of values. But again, recognizing, sort of the old "we're not in Kansas anymore" phrase, we're in a new normal, in a new world with new ways of working. There has to be a lot of intention about how do we engage now, leveraging some of those new vehicles, leveraging some of the other pieces of the puzzle. And so I think on the broad engagement, corporate social responsibility rises to the top. Employee value proposition in this new world, especially those who've now reshaped and reframed your work from home policies. And what does that mean for the organization? But let's also get outside of our organizations and think of the communities we work in, and think of our stakeholders, customers, community stakeholders, governments, just sort of the broader lens, and really doing some stakeholder mapping. What do we need those stakeholders to know, to feel, and to do around the go forward plan? So doing your stakeholder analysis as part of broad engagement, super, super critical. Those swim lanes are crystal clear. And I saw a comment in the chat box around sustainable performance. And I think that's a nice segue for us into the fourth principle, which is systemic alignment. And this is taking all of your systemic levers, and let's just think about those for a minute. From a human capital standpoint, that's your recruitment practices, that's your talent strategy, that's your onboarding, virtual onboarding with new employees. That may be some of the difficult transitions that will have to happen in organizations that are having to reshape their operating model. So all the HR systems and practices fit in here. Here's the thing. You're in the process of reshaping those anyway. The big opportunity is shape those aligned to your culture. This is the pull through for your culture, is to really ensure the sustainability and really step back and say, how do we shape those in light of what we've learned through the crisis? How do we shape those in line with our culture and values? What changes? What stays the same? What do we double index on? What do we let go of? Or what do we add? Really important as you begin to do that. The other thing that becomes important is your customer experience. And, that's dramatically different for a lot of organizations now. Those high touch points with customers are no longer possible. How do you create the high touch experience in the new world, be it digital or otherwise? So that's definitely a swim lane. I think quality anchor and just the whole idea of operational excellence, what does excellence look like today in this new world, is another piece of that. So, I mean, it's a simple framework, but we have found a lot of depth in it. We're happy to, when we send out this presentation, share just a simple template for your planning purposes, just so you can begin to kind of practical steps. By the same token, many of you, are way down the path of your planning. This might be a nice step back and reflect, maybe a reset or a realignment to make sure you're hitting all of those critical points. It's sort of the pragmatic framework of those culture and purpose levers that many of you shared in the chat and in your breakouts. So I think the last opportunity for input and feedback is really in the next slide. And just in the chat feature, what's your next step? You had some discussions with peers. We've shared a few thoughts to chew on. What's your next step in order for your organization to emerge to the next phase stronger? Would love to just see as many comments from you as possible. We'll summarize some of these, by the way. When we send you the slides, we'll share some of the highlights and the headlines, but would love to see from others what is a critical next step. Chad, anything to add? Or
yeah, so if you can send those through in the chat window, and then if there are any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. You can go into the participants window, click raise hand. Chloe will notice you, and make sure you're off mute. We'd love to have a bit of a discussion as we wind down here, and love to capture some of those in the chat window. As Rose mentioned, we'll send you some follow-ups from this, including all the data. We'll send you the word cloud, we'll send you the polls, we'll send you all this stuff that you helped create. Thank you for sharing your points of view with us, and we'll capture all that and prepare a document for you to use internally to help align stakeholders and use to begin working with. So thank you for that. And again, if anyone has questions, comments, wanted to share with the group, just go into your participant window, click on the raise hand feature, and Chloe will help us track those, see if anyone would like to share.
Great. We're seeing a lot of next steps, to add to this conversation. Digital acceleration, what's the digital strategy? Very, very big. It's part and parcel of applying that agility, isn't it, in a very pragmatic way for the restart and where you go from here. Much more streamlined decision making. Absolutely. It's all about people now. Excellent point. Let's not slip back, right? Let's pull forward. Let's go to the next step. Sustaining a positive spirit as this goes on. I mean, this was a short respite for us of less than 60 minutes, but was it energizing? Did you get energy from peers and from the conversation? How do you create this sort of a vehicle, with some regularity and some part of your routines going forward? Mindfulness, super important. Critical culture elements in crisis, appreciation, collaboration, trust, 100%. Making sure your plans reflect some specific actions for that. I think, building sustainable remote working models, all supported by that infrastructure, but infused with culture and purpose. Adapting quickly, addressing, sort of that balance of the immediacy of what we're dealing with now, and then the future focus of how do we take that forward.
Rose, I love this one from Consuelo. Taking this experience as something positive to become better versions of ourselves. That's just a wonderful way to look at it. Not all this has been good, positive, helpful, and yet, as we sort of look to learn from it, what can we take away? How can we become better as organizations? One of the things I reflect on, Rose, as you were talking about Black Lives Matter, and this idea of moving from bystanders into action is just this survey I recently saw where 62% of CEOs said they're now creating anti-racist policies, committees, practices, standards. And it's wonderful to take something that is so tragic and injustice that was served, and yet, how do we use that to catalyze and energize folks to move forward? So thank you for sharing that. Really, really helpful.
Great. I'll tell you this, I end this conversation with great hopefulness. Your comments in the chat feature, Chad, when you just said that, what occurred to me is the opportunity for transformation is now, and it's in your hands. You have such an enormous influence on the world, representing around the globe. This is a moment where we can really move to the next step, move our transformation forward, focus on people, bring humanity into the workplace, and change our communities and change the world. So I thank you so much for joining us today, for all of your commentary. Appreciate the hopefulness you leave me with us with, and I hope it's been helpful to all of you. We'll reach out with the slides and provide, as Chad said, copies of what we covered today. But thank you again for giving us the privilege of being with you.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you today. Take care.